The operation had stalled at checkpoint 4. Comms dropped to static. Maps conflicted. Drones couldn't see through the heat shimmer rising off the valley. Officers argued timing. Infantry units waited. No one moved. She stood at the rear of the relay truck. Unarmed. Assigned to equipment logs. No one asked her to weigh in. No one noticed when she stepped outside. Eyes on the ridge, no camera could read. She tapped once on the antenna housing, adjusted the relay band manually, and walked away. 30 seconds later, the feed returned. The convoy rolled forward. No one asked who fixed it. The light broke slowly across the edge of the forward operating base, a thin, chalk-colored hue that hovered above the rooftops and settled in the fine dust between tire ruts. Engines turned over one by one, grumbling into idle under the growing noise of final checks and shouted gear counts. The smell of hot metal drifted faintly from under the hoods, mixing with old sweat, diesel fumes, and the dry burn of wind off the western ridgeline. It was a morning like every other, the kind that came on with routine and never made headlines. She sat high on the turret of Delta 1, the lead Humvee, her back straight, her eyes moving with slow precision. Her gloves rested on the ring mount beside her. Not worn, not idle, but placed exactly where they belonged. Her boots were braced, legs slightly bent for shock. She'd run through her checks an hour earlier and hadn't said a word since. The convoy wasn't late, but the energy around her felt loose. Too many jokes, too much laughter near the back of the line. Someone was using an ammo crate as a table for their coffee. Another was holding up a piece of laminated map and making animal noises, trying to get a laugh out of the new guy. The noise floated up toward her like it was rising from another world. She didn't look down. She was watching the rocks. The ridge off their left flank had shifted, not the boulders. Not in a way the maps would flag. But the shade line was wrong. She tracked the wind from the northwest and saw where it should have pushed through the saddle and swept dust across the trail. It hadn't. Instead, the dirt near the goat pen stayed clean. Unnaturally so. As if brushed deliberately. The animals were gone too. No sound. Gnaw. Movement. The gate was open, but the brush hadn't been disturbed. It was a tiny thing. Unwritten. But she saw it. Her hand slid to her vest. Fingers brushing the folded terrain map pressed into the inner seam. She didn't take it out. She already knew what it showed. Hand-sketched angles. Light marks for wind arcs. A red circle drawn around this very ridge from 2 nights ago. She had logged it as a caution. Nothing more. The ground team never included it in the official file. It didn't trigger the drone's route parameters. She didn't press the point. Down below, the third vehicle crew burst into fresh laughter. Someone had said something about heat mirages and phantom camels. The convoy commander leaned over a cooler and snapped the lid shut, tossing back what looked like an energy bar. No one looked up at her. They didn't need to. She was there to turn when ordered, to fire when told. The system worked like that. Until it didn't. She shifted her weight just slightly, bringing her right knee tighter against the turret brace. The weapon's barrel edged a few degrees off center, tracking not the path ahead but the high ridge shadow just past the boulders. A shallow drift of dust moved sideways for half a second, curling low near the rocks and disappearing just as quickly. The wind changed direction, and her hand reflexively closed on the turret ring. Still no orders. Still no alert. The radio squelched with idle chatter, mostly call signs and timing updates. The final go signal came without fanfare. Engine is revved. Gears clicked into place. One by one, the convoy began to move. Tires chewing into the sun-baked dirt. Her Humvee rolled forward first, and with it, the turret swung to match pace. She didn't speak. She didn't lower her eyes. The line of vehicles behind her stretched into haze. the lead shadow cutting through dust and light. As they crossed the gate, her weapon stayed slightly offset, just enough to follow that left side ridge a second longer than protocol required. She saw nothing. She heard nothing. And she did not trust the silence. She was the first to see the pattern, and the last to be asked. The convoy threaded through the canyon slowly, dust kicking up in low plumes that flattened as the wind shifted. The rocks on either side loomed higher now, the ridgelines more jagged, the gaps between boulders wider. The road itself narrowed to a single lane of loose gravel bordered by scrub brush and broken shale. Engine noise echoed hard off the stone walls, amplified and distorted, just enough to mask anything else. Delta One led the line with practiced calm, rolling steady as the formation adjusted to the tighter corridor. She stayed fixed behind the gun, her torso pivoting gently to the left. The turret creaked faintly, just audible beneath the whine of suspension. She rotated her weapon 30 degrees off center and locked it in place. The sun hadn't reached full tilt yet, but the shadows cast on the left ridge were wrong too sharp for this time of morning. One section of slope, just above the dry goat trail, showed a faint shimmer. Not movement, not smoke, but heat where there shouldn't be any. She adjusted the side mirror below her with one gloved hand, angling it until she could catch a sliver of elevation behind the second rise. What she saw wasn't enough to name, but it scratched at the back of her judgment. A fresh dirt slide, too clean. A bush that wasn't bowed with wind, just still. The natural silence of the zone had gone hollow. Even the flies had vanished. Her headset crackled once before clearing. Comms were still running on the standard rotation. Routine check-ins. Tire pressure alerts. One operator calling for a recalibration on his rangefinder. Everything sounded normal. That was the problem. She keyed her mic. Her voice was clipped and steady. Delta One. Contact left. Upper ridge. Sector 7 Alpha. Possible, concealed OP. Request, hold, or confirm visual sweep. There was a pause. Then a short squelch. A second voice came in command. Riding in the last Humvee. Say again. Delta One. She repeated it. Same tone. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't soften it either. The reply took longer this time. In the background, she could hear keys tapping. Drone uplink telemetry being checked. Someone reading off thermal scan data. Then the voice returned. Slightly amused. Negative on heat signature. WAV confirms no movement. No change in ambient. You're clear to proceed. Maintain spacing. A second later, another voice joined an adjacent vehicle. Probably Alpha 4. She's chasing rocks again. Chuckles layered across the channel. Not cruel. Just casual. Familiar. Her hand didn't move from the turret grip. Her body remained perfectly still, but her eyes stayed on the ridge. The heat shimmer still hanging in the air like breath held too long. The dirt trail was unbroken. No hoof prints. No tire cuts. But there was a dark stain near the bend. Low and wide. It wasn't oil. It didn't spread the right way. She tapped the mount bracket twice with her thumb. Not to steady it. Just to feel the texture. Still dry. No vibration. The radio cut back in. Delta One. Acknowledge orders. Maintain course. Confirm position. She pressed her mic again. Her answer was calm. Without delay. Delta One confirms. She didn't add more. She didn't argue. Down in the cabin, the driver asked nothing. The windshield was angled upward. The view limited. He trusted the call from the rear more than he'd ever trust. A gut feeling up top. The Humvee rolled on. Behind them, the rest of the convoy followed at regulated intervals. 5 vehicles. 1 supply truck. all tracking the same line. Dust began to thicken in the pass, kicked into a swirl by shifting air currents. It blurred her side view for a moment before clearing again. Her left boot adjusted slightly, pressing down into the gravel ridgeline welded to the turret base. She braced her leg, just in case. Still no noise. Still no movement. She kept her weapon trained on the ridge. Protocol had spoken. The data said proceed. But her hand stayed locked around the grip, finger resting firm against the side guard. Not on the trigger, but 1 degree removed from it. If something moved, she wouldn't ask again. She would already be tracking. The canyon folded in tighter. The rock walls pressed close on either side as the convoy dipped into a low choke point, where wind lost momentum and sound settled into a kind of hard stillness. Delta 1 slowed to 15 miles per hour. The suspension moaned over uneven stone. Below, the driver adjusted his grip on the wheel. Behind them, the formation staggered slightly, correcting for spacing. She scanned left and up. The ridge that had shimmered before now held perfectly still. No wind touched the brush. Nothing shifted. But something had changed. The silence wasn't passive anymore, it felt held. The kind of stillness that knew how to wait. A flash. Small, but too sharp. Not sunlight on rock. Not reflection from natural stone. A precise flicker from behind a camo drape, woven into the outcropping 20 feet above their forward left vector. She saw the movement just below the glint 1 elbow, wrapped in fabric. Shifting weight into firing stance, her finger moved. At the exact moment, Command's voice crackled through the net with a flat maintain course. She squeezed the trigger. The turret kicked. Her belt-fed weapon roared to life. A hard, clean rip that echoed down the corridor like a tearing sheet of metal. Her body absorbed the recoil. Legs locked into the turret mount. She tracked immediately left to center sweep, spitting a tight arc of fire into the shadowed rock cleft. Dust exploded. Stone kipped. A camo net folded down like loose skin. A second later, a twin jet of smoke cut from 2 points farther up, the ridge RPG launches. One slightly delayed, the other caught mid-angle. One missed wide, detonating harmlessly into a far wall. The second spun too fast, struck early, and tore into a ledge without payload contact. Shrapnel fell short. Then the real fire started. Automatic weapons opened from 3 elevation points. The canyon turned to noise. Bullets cracked off armor. Stone flaked overhead. Someone yelled from Alpha 2. The lead Humvee jolted sideways as the driver reacted instinctively, nearly throwing the vehicle into the opposite wall. She didn't duck. She kept the barrel on sweep, shifting fire to the uppermost rock shelf where muzzle flash blinked once. Twice. Her rounds walked across the ridge. Precise. Controlled. She braced with each burst, the mount vibrating against her spine. Empty casings spat out in clinks and arcs, bouncing down the armor shield at her knees. The ammo belt twisted, then jumped, then uncoiled like a snake flung across stone. Below, soldiers dismounted under fire. 2 of them scrambled to cover behind the second vehicle. The rear truck took a hit, tire blown. Side panel scarred but intact. The driver hunkered low, radio pressed to his ear, yelling for a flank report. No one could hear anything. The entire firefight lasted under 30 seconds. By the time the second volley tried to find position, she had already neutralized the forward threat. Her fire chewed into the rock wall where the initial glint had flashed. The scope, or whatever had been behind it, no longer showed. A body slid half visible from cover before being swallowed by settling dust. Return fire waned. The enemy positions, whoever had manned them, went silent. Whether they'd retreated or fallen didn't matter. The attack had collapsed too early. Their window had closed before it could open. She released the trigger. The final shell ejected with a dry pop. The turret hissed faint heat. Her hands stayed on the mount. Breath, even. Around hair? The canyon still crackled with aftersound shouted names. Clicks from toggled safety switches. The metallic groan of shifting armor. The convoy reformed by degrees. Vehicles rolling into staggered cover. Weapons now trained in all directions. Delta 1. Report came the voice. Higher pitched, now. Urgency replacing sarcasm. She keyed her mic. Her voice stayed level. Fired without clearance. Ridge contact. Confirmed RPG origin. Suppressed left flank. Awaiting further instruction. No reply came immediately. She heard the rear vehicle relaying something up the chain. Words she couldn't catch under the haze of overlapping orders. A medic ran to the rear truck. One gunner sat on the ground, his helmet beside him, shaking slightly. The driver from Alpha 4 was on his radio, glancing at her turret. Then, looking away, no one said thank you. No one said her name. Command finally responded. Copy. Maintenant que en position. Consolidate formation. Will assess forward threat. She acknowledged without emotion. No explanation offered. No apology. She remained at the turret, hands steady, muzzle angled just off target, eyes scanning above where the glint had been. The belt was nearly dry. Her boots stayed braced. The shells at her feet gleamed in the dirt. Behind her, dust settled across the convoy. Reports were already being written. By the time they reached the battalion, her name wouldn't appear near the top. The file would say, reaction time was fast. Coordination effective. Response within protocol. She knew that wasn't true. And she didn't care if they didn't write it. She had already acted. The morning after the firefight, the forward base returned to motion with the rhythm of routine. The medical tent logged 2 minor injuries, 1 shoulder bruise from a side impact, 1 technician rattled by a concussive burst, but cleared within the hour. There were no fatalities. The word circulating was contained. A few shook their heads at the speed of it all. How quick it started. How quick it ended. Someone mentioned luck. Someone else credited drone coverage. No one said her name. She sat outside the admin tent with her helmet in her lap. Dust still clinging to the outer edge. Scuffed along the strap where the recoil had jolted her body into the turret rim. Her boots were coated up to the laces. Her name had not yet been added to the debrief queue on the screen beside the entrance. When it blinked next, she was listed as Support Observation Reserve. The designation was incorrect. Inside, the temperature was colder. A generator hummed behind the far wall, pumping air into the briefing space, where officers gathered around 2 projection boards. Slides rolled by, marked with timestamps, GPS logs, threat origin points, and brief excerpts of radio traffic. On one of the slides, a still frame from helmet cam footage showed the ridgeline where the ambush began. The perspective came from Alpha 2. She wasn't visible in the shot. The turret she had fired from was cropped clean from the frame. Her name was called. She entered without pause. 3 officers stood behind a portable screen. One of them was typing. The lead officer, a major she had only met twice before, gestured toward a chair without looking up from his clipboard. He asked the question without inflection. Why did you engage without clearance? Her response was simple. Quiet, confirmed glint. Ridge elevation. Movement matched concealed threat. Visual matched hostile prep. No time to request. The officer nodded once. Barely. He tapped his pen against the table and didn't follow up. Another spoke next. His tone was softer but no warmer. This will go in your file. Not punitive. Just flagged. Protocol breach. Understood? She nodded. They moved on. The remaining questions focused on timing, ammunition use, and line of sight angles. Nothing about what she had seen. Nothing about what had happened after. When the review ended, she was thanked for her cooperation and asked to step outside so the next person could be called in. Outside the tent, her shadow stretched long across the gravel. A few soldiers walked by without acknowledging her. One looked her way, almost spoke, then checked himself and kept walking. She could hear conversation deeper inside the admin bay. Someone congratulated the convoy commander on formation discipline. There was a clatter of plastic as someone opened a fresh case of pre-filled reports. The commander was being briefed again for the brigade summary. No one asked for her statement. She returned her helmet to the supply rack and found her nameplate had been removed from the turret locker. A red sticker marked the front rotational pending. No notice. No explanation. Just quiet removal. The next shift's gunner, someone she barely knew, avoided her eyes as he passed. Back in the barracks, she found her gear stacked neatly beside a lower bunk. Her file folder had been slid under her bag. A mission summary was clipped to the front. The description read, "Ambush event engagement response logged post-incident, no deviation from standard timeline." She didn't read the rest. She pulled the zipper on her gear bag slowly, folded her gloves, and placed them in the side pouch without urgency. Her helmet remained on the bunk, still bearing the fine layer of dust from the canyon. She didn't wipe it clean. Outside the tent, the wind began to shift. The grit in the air felt familiar. She walked past the admin steps, past the motor pool, past the group of non-commissioned officers recounting the contact with phrases like sharp execution and smooth transition. Her name didn't enter the retelling. She didn't pause. She didn't slow. Her back stayed straight. Her stride was even. The dust on her boots would speak for itself. The barracks, after 2200, were never fully quiet. But the noise settled into a manageable rhythm: boots scuffing, fabric shifting. The distant hum of the generator outside the tent wall. Most of the lights were dimmed. One overhead unit flickered now and then. A loose wire no one had gotten around to fixing. The others slept or scrolled through old messages, checked packs, played music too low to name. No one asked where she'd been assigned. Her name wasn't on the roster anymore. She sat on the edge of her bunk, one boot half-laced, the other resting sideways where she dropped it earlier. In front of her, a small tablet screen glowed faint blue. The brightness dialed down low to avoid drawing attention. Her helmet lay beside her, lens facing up. She slid the flash drive from her boot lining and inserted it without sound. The footage loaded slowly. The camera timestamp matched the moment command had told her to stand down. She fast-forwarded past that part, past the first few seconds of silence, then stopped, frame by frame. She worked forward. Her fingers moved in a steady rhythm over the playback keys. She kept her breathing level. She wasn't searching for vindication. She was checking her own memory, validating what she had already known in the moment she pulled the trigger. At second 27, the glint appeared, less than a third of a second long. It reflected from the edge of the ridge, just below the shadow line. She zoomed in. The image pixelated, but the shape held a clean angle, unnatural, catching light on the far edge of the outcrop. Not random. Not mineral shine. She marked it. At second 29, the dust shifted. A ripple below the brush line. Far too horizontal for wind shear. She played it again, then slowed the feed. The pattern spread in a curved arc from the center point, outward compressed air, the kind made by quick, subtle motion in dry terrain. It wasn't proof for a report, but it was proof for her. She marked that too. At second 31, the net moved. The pattern of camo shifted slightly, stretched upward, then fell back. It was almost imperceptible. Without the playback slowed and stabilized, it would have vanished into static. She noted the frame, drew a line across the screen with her stylus, then overlaid the trajectory paths from her initial burst. Her rounds had connected within 3 degrees of the visual origin point that, in any standard debrief, would be called a textbook suppression. It had taken less than 4 seconds between glint and fire. The official report had clocked her action as premature, unconfirmed. A risk. She compiled the clips, timestamp overlays, and vector lines into a silent folder labeled Ridge Sector 7 Alpha. She didn't include an explanation. She didn't write a summary. She copied the folder to her flash drive, encrypted it, and uploaded it into the battalion system using the standard template for voluntary post-action submission. It would be routed through 2 levels of filter before reaching her commanding officer. If it reached him at all, she didn't wait for confirmation. She closed the file, shut off the tablet, and placed her helmet back beside her pack. The lens still glowed faint red standby mode. Always ready. No one else used that camera. She didn't trust the others to calibrate it properly. She slid one photo from the drive's backup folder, a still frame captured at second 29. Mid-ripple. Mid-glint. The angle showed only dust and light to most eyes. But she had seen it then. And she saw it now. She printed it with the portable slate printer borrowed from the comms tent and trimmed the edge with her boot knife. No labels. No commentary. She pinned the photo inside her locker, behind her gear harness. The edge curled slightly as it settled. Down the row, someone laughed at a video on their tablet. A pair of boots thudded to the floor near the canvas partition. Her shift would start in an hour, watch duty on the east tower, facing the motor pool. Not combat, not rotation, but above ground. She preferred the height. She stood and began tying her boots slowly, her fingers looping the laces with practiced speed. Her gloves were already rolled at the edge of her bunk. She picked them up, checked for grit, then slid them on. No one else spoke to her as she moved through the tent. They didn't need to. She had filed the report. She had pulled the frame. She had proven what she saw. And no one had asked her to. Outside, the wind pressed against the side of the tent, dry and constant. Carrying the smell of grit and motor oil, she pushed the flap aside and stepped into the dark. The glow from the tablet still faintly warming the inside of her locker. She didn't look back. The evidence was there. It didn't need an audience. It was enough that she knew it had always been real. The base stirred early, engines coughing to life, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge. Metal clanged as equipment was moved into staging positions, and fuel lines hissed as crews topped off the outbound trucks. The chatter in the supply corridor was clipped and confident another convoy, another routine clearance, through a sector no longer flagged as high risk. Her shift had started an hour earlier, logging crates against manifests under the side canopy by the tower stairs. She wasn't on turret rotation. She hadn't been asked. She heard the route discussed over the open channel. Nothing formal. Just operators passing notes between departments. Quick confirmations of waypoints and time of departure. But one phrase held her attention. Sector 7 Alpha. The old name. The same one she'd logged by hand weeks ago. Her fingers stilled over the clipboard. She listened harder. They were running through the same choke point. She stepped away from the crate she'd been logging, walked 2 rows down, and opened the plastic weatherproof tube she kept clipped to her belt. Inside, folded 4 times over, was a terrain grid from the previous mission. She had redrawn it the night after the attack, color-coded for dust paths, wind direction, and shaded angles based on solar position. She hadn't shown it to anyone since. Not because it wasn't accurate, because no one had asked. At a folding table inside the operations tent, she spread the map open. She circled the same ridgeline, her handwriting, sharp and narrow. Printed a note in black marker across the top edge. Watch the left ridge. Noon, wind still. She weighed the paper with a flashlight and walked out without speaking. She didn't file a report. She didn't ask for clearance. She left the map where someone might find it. That would have to be enough. The convoy rolled out at 10:30. By 12:15, the sirens cut across the base. It was different this time, less controlled. Radio chatter stuttered. The medical crew moved fast across the courtyard. 2 vehicles had been hit. The lead driver had taken shrapnel. 1 rear gunner had gone down with a leg injury. The firefight had lasted longer, nearly 2 full minutes of return fire. The attack came from the same elevation, same shadows, same concealed angles. She stood at the edge of the tower platform and listened. Her headset buzzed with static between channels. Then cleared. Second vehicle called it. Someone reported. Said they had warning. Pulled wide. Spotted the ridgeline flare. Hit early. Cut losses. The phrase repeated called it early. She watched the medevac team move with urgency, but not panic. 1 soldier limped across the gravel, supported by 2 others. The rest of the convoy returned in order. Tighter now. Less of the usual conversation trailing behind them. Later, inside the admin tent, the official report scrolled across the shared screen. Ambush encountered. Response was rapid. Losses contained. No mention of the note. No image of the map. No name. In the supply bay, someone had repainted a crate from her last rotation. Her name was still stenciled along the side, though now a red line had been marked through it. Reassigned. Not removed. It meant she was still listed, but only on standby. She walked past the operations tent, just after 1700. Inside, a few officers leaned over the map table. Her annotated sheet was gone. A new digital overlay had taken its place, one that showed heat signatures from the engagement, new predictive models for the ridge, planned UAV passes. It matched what she had drawn. The details looked identical. No one saw her pause. No one invited her in. She stood there long enough to see the red flare markers blink across the ridgeline. They were late. At the edge of the tarmac, the second vehicle's gunner stepped out of formation, pulling his gear from the side mount. He was young, 20 maybe, eyes still wide from adrenaline. He stopped when he saw her. He looked once, then again. As if confirming something, he didn't speak. He just nodded. Once, not like a salute or a thank you, just acknowledgement. She returned it without expression, then turned back toward the tower. Her influence lived on in the silence. The tower was quiet at this hour, high enough above the motor pool to catch the edge of the wind, and just far enough from the admin bay that no one wandered up without purpose. The sun hung low in the sky, dull gold bleeding through haze, casting everything in long shadow. She sat with her back straight and her boots braced on the crossbeam, elbows resting on the rail. Binoculars in hand. Not moving, just observing. Down below, a fresh patrol rolled out 5 vehicles. Light armor. Same formation as before. Their radio checks were clear, their tone casual. They drove like no one had died. Maybe they hadn't. Not this week. She didn't track their movement with the binoculars. She already knew their route. Instead, she studied the ridgeline beyond the old wash. The slope that had seen 2 ambushes, and yet still carried no official flag. The dust there shifted differently. The surface held the kind of subtle pressure change that came from something unseen, an uneven weight, or a timed presence just beneath view. It wasn't enough to confirm. It never was. Her notebook rested open beside her. The wind flipped the top page once, before she pinned it down with her hand. The edges were frayed, corners creased, but the writing remained clear. Elevation charts, directional arrows, wind notes in tight script, all tracked over time, with no dates listed, just patterns, arcs of tension rising again and again in the same zones, drawn in red ink that never smudged. Inside the back flap, taped flat, was the printed image from her original footage. The one with the shimmer and the ripple. She'd folded it once, carefully, and kept it there. Not for memory, for continuity. She didn't need to look at it anymore. She remembered it perfectly. Her headset stayed silent. No calls. No updates. No one expected input from her position. It wasn't marked for active overwatch. Just a courtesy post. Eyes on the edge. In case someone missed something else, she'd heard the phrasing before. Warm body. Low risk. Still, she watched. A gust swept through the lower valley. Dust lifted along the ridge in a wave that broke over a rise and curled unnaturally. She tracked it with the edge of her view. There was something in the way it fell, how it didn't scatter evenly, how it left a trail with no source. She didn't speak. She picked up her pen and circled a point on the map bottom quadrant. Edge of a rise. Same pattern as last time. No label. No signature. Just the mark. The radio crackled once from the tent below. Someone requested confirmation on outbound fuel. She didn't answer. That wasn't her job anymore. She closed the notebook, tucked the pen back into the spine, and laid it across her lap. The wind carried a sound like tires crunching gravel far in the distance. She listened, not for fear, just to listen. She would stay here as long as they let her. Longer. Maybe. She didn't need a turret. She didn't need a report. She needed only the ridgeline, the dust, and the chance to mark what others didn't see in time. Some truths didn't need a voice. They only needed someone watching. She was never the one in the spotlight. Her name didn't make it into the reports. Her decision wasn't praised in the debrief. But she saw what others missed. And she acted when it mattered. Not for credit. Not for approval. Just because she knew it had to be done, that kind of strength doesn't need volume. It holds steady in silence, in patience, in presence. Her role may have been overlooked, but her impact shaped every outcome that followed. She didn't wait to be told. She trusted her instinct, followed it without apology, and watched as the world slowly caught up. If her story stayed quiet, it's only because people didn't know where to look. If this moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories like hers, quiet, powerful, and true, consider following for more.